If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things that you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied the principles, and then you use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. My name is Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and a story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
And I'm Melanie Hill, editor, poet, and author of middle grade novel Jet Cooper, and I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
On today's episode, Melanie pitched Mulholland Drive, God help us, so that we can study constant characters. This 2001 film was written and directed by David Lynch. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. But I mean, if you've seen Mulholland Drive, I mean, it's just not. I still don't know what happened. Anyway, and please help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. Apple Podcast listeners, all you need to do is on your phone, go to the show's landing page, scroll to the bottom, click the 5 stars. It's super simple, and it would really help us out a lot if you just took a minute to do that. So thank you in advance. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button so you never miss an episode. I'm trying to build up the channel there. So if you watch on YouTube, subscribe. All right. That's my little sales pitch for today. Melanie, I'm a little punch drunk here from Mulholland Drive, I have to say. Oh, okay. Before we get going, I have to know, when you chose Mulholland Drive, did you know what you were doing? Did you know this was an antiplot film?
I didn't realize it was antiplot, but I would have guessed that that's what it would be because I have watched David Lynch things before, particularly Twin Peaks, which was very popular when I was 18 or so going through university, and we would have Twin Peak parties and watch episodes. So this was very reminiscent for me. It's very David Lynch. So I didn't know, but I would have guessed that it was a bit, like it is. But I will say, I'll just say this doesn't seem as trippy to me as Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is even like the symbology of it is similar. But Twin Peaks is even more kind of out there than Mulholland Drive, which is interesting because Mulholland Drive came after Twin Peaks. So, no, I didn't know, but I would have guessed that it was a bit non-linear, out there, whatever. Nice euphemistic way we can explain it.
If for anyone listening, if you do not know what we mean by anti-plot, go back to the work we did in season 5 because we talked about it there, and we studied an anti-plot movie then. It was Wayne's World. Wayne's World had the advantage of comedy. Mulholland Drive, not a lot of giggles.
Anti-giggles.
Anti-giggles. Oh, so I didn't realize this was David Lynch when I first when I sat down to watch it. And of course the opening titles came up and I saw David Lynch and I just thought, oh, Christ almighty, here we go.
Your heart sank.
It didn't really sink. It was just, I knew it was going to be trippy. Yeah, that's a good word, trippy. And at first I actually thought it might be a multi-plot story. And I thought, okay, I'm going to hang in there because all these little plot lines that he's weaving, I'm expecting them to come together in the end. And then the wheels came off when, and I lost all hope. My own personal all was lost moment came. I think it's just past the midpoint. It's when Betty is brought to, she does her first audition and she's brought across the street to the Justin Theroux production. I can't remember what that guy's name was. Jack, maybe? Whatever that Justin Theroux's character's name
something.
is.
Yeah.
It's almost irrelevant what anybody's character's name is. It's not my lack of preparation. It's just it does not matter. It really does not matter. So the Justin Theroux character, he's a director, he's making a movie, and uh not Nev Campbell, what's her name? Naomi Campbell. Is that her name?
Oh, Naomi Watts.
Naomi Watts. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Neve Campbell to Naomi Watts. My poor brain. This is what David Lynch has done to me. So the Naomi Watts character, Betty, she's an actress and she goes to an audition, and that production, the casting director knows is never going to go anywhere. And the casting director says, come with me. You're a great actress. I'm going to bring you across to the production across the street, and I want you to audition for that director. Great. Betty is a Canadian who has gone to Hollywood in order to have a career as an actor. We are led to believe that this is her object of desire. She has uprooted her entire life to come and make her dreams come true. She's on the threshold of making her dreams come true finally in the second half of the movie. And she bails on the audition, not because she's nervous or she gets a bad creep vibe from the director or anything else, but because she has agreed to meet a friend. And this friend is Rita, this Mrs. who has come from nowhere. Betty doesn't even know. And I'm like, why? Why would she turn that down? And I'm like, just go with it. It's David Lynch. It's David Lynch. Just have no expectations. You just have to go on the acid trip with him. Abandon the logic. So I don't know what the heck you're going to do with constant characters. I can't wait to hear it. Because just go for it. Constant characters.
Go for it. Constant
and I wish you luck.
Now, you are going to disagree with some of what I say today, and that's okay, because I actually, knowing that it was David Lynch, I was expecting weirdness and got trippy weirdness. But what I will say to people, if you don't mind that sort of thing, watch it the first time and then watch it a second time because it's really different the second time you watch it once you know what's actually going on in the movie. And you'll be boggled the first time you watch it. And it is an experience to watch it. But you'll have a different understanding. All right. So if you haven't seen it and you don't mind those sorts of movies, then don't listen to the rest of the episode. Go away and watch it and then come back and join us. So that's all I'll say about that. But, like I said, I wasn't surprised by its trippiness. It made sense in the end. And then watching it a second time really gave it a different perspective. That doesn't mean it wasn't trippy and that some of the weirdness, even in the dreamscape of the movie, was weird. But knowing what dreams are like, I think what I stopped doing the second time was looking for the logic and just understanding that it was a dream. And it made it easier the second time to not necessarily understand what was going on, but accept what was going on, and that there was a lot more, I suppose, symbolic meaning behind things. Anyway, maybe that's just me grasping at straws.
Resistance is futile. Just surrender.
Right.
See, I'm in the camp that says the story should make sense to you on one viewing. Radical thought, I know, but...
But yes, so the thing about the constant character and Betty, because I'm just going to call her Betty, even though, I'm just going to call her Betty because she's Betty for most of the story, even if there's two storylines. What it did on the second time was help me understand why Betty is a constant character. And that's because basically in the dream sequence, it's a dream and you can't hide the inevitability of what she's done throughout the dream. So the dream might give you an alternative reality. It might give you a bit of hope and optimism about Betty, but in the end, nothing can change Betty's course, I suppose is how I started to think about that as a constant character. Very different from every other movie we've watched this season, right? But like you said, it's an anti-plot movie, and not everything will be as linear or as obvious as what it has been in the other episodes. But before I go on and talk a little bit more about Betty as a constant character, there's a really important lesson to be learned, I think, from watching a David Lynch film, because he creates a very real sense of unease when you watch his movies. And again, if you've watched Twin Peaks, you'll understand what I mean. And he does something very specific in order to create that sense of unease. And there are multiple scenes when a character says something or initiates something, and the response that they get from another character is either unexpected, illogical, random, or a non-response. So there is no response at all when you would expect there to be one. And the technique, when a character doesn't respond in an expected or logical way, is actually called a non sequitur, right? Now, Lynch combines odd settings, disproportionate scale, out of place objects with non sequiturs to disarm and disorientate viewers, right? And it is super effective as a literary device when it's used properly. Now, comedians use non sequiturs a lot. Like characters like, Kramer from Seinfeld and Moira Rose from Schitt's Creek are good examples of characters who drop in non sequiturs all the time, and they do it for comedic effect, and it's quite good. But this week, we have seen how it can be used to unsettle and create a sense of foreboding. Now, using non sequiturs in a dream sequence makes a great deal of sense because dreams are illogical and they skip time and things warp. So I thought that it made sense. Now, Lynch also organizes the scenes in his sequences by mixing up those with a level of logic, combines it with those that don't have logic. And there's a certain pattern that he uses. So he'll give you logic, illogic, bigger illogic, bigger illogic. And it really created a sense of disorientation, I think, and it increased the confusion about what's going on. Now, I've just finished a Gothic mystery that uses this technique to great effect. So it can be used very easily in written work as well. So one of the characters in this book is made up of multiple memory fragments and ghosts. So they don't always have the right responses or the situational awareness to answer questions in an expected manner. And it's disturbing, but it is meant to be disturbing. So that's in reading this book, it was a really good segue to watch Mulholland Drive and then see how that happens and to have that feeling not only from a book but in a movie, and then think about that and see what literary device is actually being applied in this circumstance to create that effect and that feeling in the reader. Now, I think it's worth watching Mulholland Drive to see how non sequiturs are used and feel the effect that they create, right? Lynch uses or used mild, slightly over-exaggerated speech and action, which created a sense of something not being quite right. And he then also used the obvious overreactions or really obvious non-standard responses. And that forces the question in the viewer of what the hell is going on? And there can be a fine line, right, between creating that curiosity to drive you on to watch or creating that sense of, I've got no idea and I'm going to abandon it, which is where Valerie was sitting probably for most of that this week.
You got that right.
Yeah, So I think it's also worthwhile in seeing where non sequiturs are used in novels, especially as progressive complications, right? So that is a really good application of that technique. So keep an eye out for that when you're reading. Now, all right. Now, Betty as a constant character. Now, last week, I talked about how important the world is when it comes to understanding what happens with constant characters or the change that happens with constant characters. And what I'm talking about there is called a story arc. So the constant character remains the same, which means their decision making or the idea that they hold onto remains consistent throughout the story. Now, what happens in stories with pessimistic arcs is that the character cannot change the world to suit themselves. So the world gets harder and more difficult. In Mulholland Drive's dual storylines, the character of Betty is constant. She has no ability to change the outcome. And that is because in the real world, which I'll call Hollywood for the sake of the episode, Betty is not chosen, or she is not a chosen one, whether it be as an actress or as a lover. And instead, Betty is subject to the ambitions and desires of Hollywood power brokers and those who can make it, per se. So these forces are beyond Betty's control. She can't even influence the outcome, no matter how much she loves or how many roles she gets. And even when she hires the hitman and he signals that he's killed Rita, it is not a win. It will end with the world coming down harder on her, which is signaled in the dialogue as her neighbor telling her the detectives have come around again and they're still looking for you. Now, in the dream world, Hollywood is represented by the anonymous, sinister forces that lurk in the background of Betty and Rita's love story, right? Betty's optimism and her affair with Rita have no end because the chain of events that Betty starts before the dream will eventually catch up with her and the dream needs to end. So, yes, this is an odd one. And it is not straightforward as the other examples that we've had this season. However, what this pessimistic story arc shows us is that the world will never change no matter what the character does or how persistent and quietly determined they are. Now, some constant characters in stories with pessimistic arcs are that way because they are stubborn and pig-headed for all the wrong reasons. And the world for both of these characters, even if they're persistent or if they're stubborn and pig-headed, the world will push back harder for those characters who try to change it. And that's the difference between this pessimistic arc and an optimistic arc, where a character can change the world around them. So stories with a constant character and pessimistic story arcs all have a sense of foreboding about them that starts at the beginning. This establishes the feeling that their plight is hopeless, or that they are too stubborn to see what's happening, or simply that the world is just unfair and sometimes unjust. That foreboding must continue through the whole story so that when you get to the end and the protagonist doesn't change themselves or the world, the pessimistic ending is inevitable. So even if you wish that the ending was different. All right, that's very general, but that's what I've kind of have got out of Mulholland Drive this week for constant characters. And I have to admit, Valerie, that I didn't even search for the speech in praise of the villain because just of the general confusion that I experienced watching the movie. So I'm curious to see, did you find one or not?
Nope.
Not surprised. I'm not surprised at all.
So there, that's my bit done.
Short episode this week.
There's no speech in praise of the villain because I didn't find one because there isn't one. So I'll talk more about that in a second. Okay, I have to come clean a little bit here. I can appreciate Mulholland Drive And I know there are people who love this kind of thing. Personally, I have very little patience for it. I see the movie differently than you. I don't think I'm right and you're wrong, or I don't. It's not a question of that. Um, it's just a different perspective. I actually think Betty does have a huge change arc. In fact, to me, that's what the whole movie was about. So, it was really interesting listening to what you were talking about this week. And as I was watching the movie, I thought, what's Melanie going to do with this? I wonder. Because to me, the whole thing is, you've got this fresh-faced, innocent, young woman, young Canadian, and she has gone to Hollywood and has been corrupted, right? Um, no, I didn't do a lot of research because I I didn't care enough to do the research, and it wasn't laziness. It's that David Lynch did not emotionally engage me in this. I don't think he really wanted to. I just don't think that's what this was for. This type of narrative, whether it's in film or prose or on a stage, in a play, is just not my jam. It's not my cup of tea. I find it, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-important, maybe. I just kept thinking, David Lynch, get over yourself. Just tell me a story, right? I am here for the stories. I am a story nerd. I love stories. I love storytelling. Um, but to me, this kind of narrative, and there's lots of them in all disciplines, it just feels to me like the writer is more concerned here with showing off what they can do and how clever they are. Like they're more concerned with that than in entertaining the audience. And for me as an artist, my main concern is entertaining my audience. I just find this kind of pretentious. Um, and hey, if other people who love this, that's great. That's the beauty of art, right? Doesn't matter how popular a story is, how critically acclaimed something is. There will be a group of people who love it and a group of people who don't. That's what art is for, and that's fine. Okay. Now, in saying all of that, the beauty of understanding story theory is that we can look at a movie or a play or a book and examine the craft objectively. That's why I love story theory, because storytelling, art, is by its nature subjective, and we become really connected to it, especially the story that we are telling, because it's our blood, sweat, and tears going into it. And it can be really hard for us to pull back and look at the work that we have written objectively. Well, story theory is the tool that allows us to do that. And for that reason, in my opinion, anyone serious about becoming a writer professionally really needs to know their craft. It's for survival, if nothing else. Otherwise, you'll be totally crushed. So my personal opinion on this type of movie is neither here nor there. It does not matter. Because I know story theory, I can put that aside and look at it objectively. Okay. So objectively then, I can identify this movie as an anti-plot story. And like I said, go back to season 5 if you're not quite sure what I mean there. But basically, in an anti-plot story, story logic that we have come to know and expect from most of the stories that we consume, that goes right out the window. Forget it. Forget it. Don't expect anything to make logical sense. It won't. Story form is also out the window. And because of that, there is no speech in praise of the villain, because the villain isn't clearly defined. Yeah, there are shadowy figures and all that kind of stuff, and there's the mobster looking guys, but they're not antagonists the way we expect to see antagonists, the way we're used to seeing them in a classic story form, in an arc plot story, for example. Mulholland Drive doesn't work that way. That's not its purpose. So that's all I have to say. There's nothing else for me to say. There is no speech in praise of the villain, so I can't talk about it because it's an antiplot story, and that's not how antiplot stories roll. So, Melanie, I'll hand it back to you for your final thoughts.
Yeah. Well, like Valerie said, yes, it is anti-plot, and therefore there's not story logic or anything applied to it. So perhaps it wasn't the best example of a constant character in a story with a pessimistic arc. But if you'd like to watch more movies to understand constant characters with pessimistic story arcs, then try Leaving Las Vegas or Chinatown. And if you want to read more stories that have this type of character and also this type of ending, the books I'd recommend that have it would be The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which is a John le Carre. And I've also just recently finished The Poisonous Tale by Catherine Kemp, which is exactly the same. It is a constant character and a pessimistic story arc. And so there are, again, examples of this type of story out there. These ones that I've recommended in terms of the novels have a more traditional type of storytelling involved in them. So it'll be a little bit easier to understand what's going on.
Well, that wraps it up for this week. Alleluia. Join us again next week when we discuss Conclave. Now, this is a good movie. If you've not watched Conclave yet, here's your opportunity. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. For the power to write a best-selling story, come visit us at storynerd.ca/courses. To join my inner circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And for more information about Melanie's books, visit melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.